Okay, we are all set. Getting down toward the very end of the semester here, of course. Today, we are completing our transition beyond the PhD application itself. Today, we are talking about interviews. This might feel like a long way ahead to focus if you're not applying this year, but eventually it'll be relevant. Last time I gave you my exclusive secret peek into the admissions process and its inner workings. Talk to you about how we do application review in the program that I'm affiliated with, and even showed you basically all of the advice that I share in written form with our new committee members. And then we talked a little bit about the interview process, but not in any meaningful detail. And I illustrated these processes with some numbers from our own program last year, in part to highlight that most interviewed applicants do get in. So today we'll talk more about interviews. And one thing that I've already emphasized a little bit is that this is very much a two-way evaluation process. It is not just for the program to decide whether they want to admit you. In fact, it is more for you to figure out whether this is the right program for you. I realized that the program has kind of the upstream decision here about whether you get in before you can decide whether you'd like to choose it. But definitely, from the perspective of graduate programs, interviews are actually firstly about recruiting and only secondly about evaluation. And so I mentioned last time that for the program that I'm affiliated with, 3/4 of those interviewed do receive program acceptance, at least among our domestic applicants. And even those that are not, some of them may remain direct admit eligible, since ours is a program that has both program admission for rotations and the possibility of direct admission for other applicants who meet our standards of admission. And I would suggest that this proportion, although it may vary some, it's probably roughly similar from one rotation-based program to the next. And that might vary a little bit, but I think this is pretty typical. Now, different programs operate different ways. And so if a program is operating based on direct admission only, it may have to do more with the decisions that specific faculty make about who they want to interview. But, I've sure you've noticed in your time at UW how distracted and sometimes overwhelmed faculty can be. And so, if you try to picture these people deciding to invest time in interviewing someone who they don't really think they'll want to accept, no, that's not terribly plausible. They're just not going to do that with their time. So, I would say that even in direct admit programs, you have at least a significant chance of getting in if you reach the interview stage, just because of these sorts of time management factors. And so, although this might seem like kind of an unfamiliar, even insecure situation to be in, to be interviewing for a program you really want to get into, and it's all new and different for you to go through this experience. I'm highlighting this so much to try to encourage you to feel confident about the whole process. Because you probably are getting in. And, like I said, this is really more about, for them, it's more about recruiting than it is about evaluation. So, I highlight this to try to encourage you to enter interviews with that spirit of confidence. And so to reinforce the idea that, for us, it really is about recruiting first and foremost, our interviews are not, you know, are not really set up in such a way as you might if it was primarily about evaluating candidates. There are interactions that can be informative, and I'll highlight those later. But our interviews include a lot of other things, things that are not for us. And so, during our interviews, we share a lot of information with our interviewees. We talk about all different aspects of our program, from the curriculum to the professional development resources we have available, to snapshots of the research going on, especially student-led research, all different characteristics of our program in terms of the composition of the faculty affiliated with it, and on and on and on. And this serves no evaluative purpose for us, really, unless someone's falling asleep, I guess. But otherwise, this is really to persuade the applicants. And likewise, we have panel discussions led by current students, on all sorts of topics, whether it's aspects of professional development that they're familiar with, or details of benefits available to our students, all different topics. Again, not for us and no real role in evaluating the applicants. There's also a great deal of informal interaction with which our interviewees really can't get enough of. I think we try to build a lot in, and then they still tell me they'd like even more. So informal interaction with current students, with faculty, and although these are sometimes, at least moderately informative to us about the applicants, more so they are to allow the interviewees to get a sense of what people are like, what faculty and students are like here, what it's like to interact with them, and to give them a chance to ask a whole range of questions that are not necessarily about research in the labs that they're most interested in. And I actually do myself this presentation about life in Madison during our interviews. And so again, that's not for my benefit, and usually there are at least a few present who are already well familiar with life in Madison. But for the rest, there's a lot of new stuff. They have a lot of questions. And during the pandemic, we even did on the same Zoom call, we did live check-ins with current students all around town from some of their favorite places. So yeah, we went to that length to try to help our interviewees understand what a neat place this is. And again, that's really purely for recruiting, even though we haven't, accepted them yet. Well, we will accept most of them. So, these are all parts of our interview process that align with this idea that recruiting is actually our number one purpose here. So, of course, that's maybe reassuring, but that's, I don't know if you really need to hear a whole lot more about that. You'd probably rather hear, in terms of whatever element of evaluation there is, what our graduate program's hoping to see in this interview context. And, I'll highlight a few things that may seem kind of obvious. So, in terms of communicating about science, You know, whether it's about your own research or talking with someone else about their research or bigger picture discussions that might emerge. You know, it certainly helps to convey your enthusiasm. And, you know, it helps if you are, you know, somewhat ready to engage with people, not overly withdrawn. You know, sometimes it can be hard in this particular context, this unfamiliar context at first. You know, it can be hard for some of us not to be a little shy. But you know, this is definitely you know, the sort of venue where it really you know, it really benefits you to you know, to try to be at least somewhat interactive with people, you know, if not a little more. And you know, this is also an opportunity for programs to confirm that you have you know, the sort of understanding of your own research and ability to communicate it that they would be looking for. Now, you have submitted an application with a personal statement that also gets to this question. But, you know, I mean, written and oral communication are different things, but maybe more important than that is that, well, different applicants have different amounts of input that they might receive on their statement of purpose from different people, even including their advisor potentially. And so, you know, programs are interested to confirm that you can, you know, really talk about your research without anything to lean on in the moment. So that is a relevant thing here. And also your ability to engage with others about their research. You know, whether you seem interested in research that is not what you've done or what you immediately plan to do in graduate school. You know, people who are a little more engaged with others' research and beyond, you know, they you know, they can make a graduate program a somewhat more you know, fulfilling community. You know, if people are not just kind of off on their own doing their own thing, but you know, talking to each other about their research and other scientific topics, you know, maybe sharing ideas, you know, giving each other feedback. So, you know, graduate programs would like to find people who are, you know, able and willing to really engage with others about their research. And of course, you know, like if you're talking with faculty, even if it's a faculty member, maybe who wasn't at the top of your list in terms of who you wanted to talk with, it's always going to make a better impression if you, you know, if you are more engaged in talking about their research rather than less. And you know, that also goes along with being able to ask good questions. So, you know, that relies on, you know, you following what they're saying for one thing, and, you know, thinking about it kind of independently at the same time, and either asking good clarifying questions or even, you know, questions that might extend, you know, what they're talking about in some way. And you know, the last thing I would say is just you know, lack of any caution flags. And I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by this, but you know, I mean, we over the years we've actually encountered a curious range of behaviors even during interviews, and so you know, yeah, not setting off any alarm bells is always a good thing. So, you know, these are some of the general things, and I'll get a little bit more specific. And so kind of, you know, taking off on the last point, but, you know, kind of broadening it a bit. So what are, in other words, so if this is kind of what programs are looking for, what are programs not looking for? So what are they hoping not to see in interviewees? So some of these are just the flip side of the points I just made. So, you know, probably, a decent chunk of those who don't get in after they interviewed, people did not feel like, they had either the most solid grasp of their own research, or they were not able to communicate it very clearly, or they're maybe thinking about it in kind of a superficial way, not really able to engage on the big picture of it, even if asked. Or getting to the others research side of things, someone who shows little interest in what others are doing, or not showing a lot of interest in the program in general, or just kind of remaining quite shy and withdrawn throughout the whole interview and not really engaging much with people. These are all, I would say, risk factors in terms of getting in. At a more extreme level of interest, we have had interviewees, both online and in person, who have not fully participated in the scheduled interview activities. They don't get in. No shocker there, probably. And in other cases, people were present physically, but maybe not entirely present mentally in some observable way. And I'll expand on that a bit as well. And we have even had instances in which interviewees, interacted in ways, often with students rather than faculty, in ways that did not seem entirely professional. I think that sometimes people have interviewed here, and I think this happened more so in person, but I think some people came here and they had the idea that, that they had to do well when they were talking with the faculty. But then once they were with students, they were with people who were kind of, on their side and didn't really care about the program side of things. That's actually not true. Our students care about, who we're bringing in to join them. And they want to have, as strong a graduate program as possible going forward. They're likely to say something, if they note any, kind of concerning behavior from anyone. And so, I'll even step through a few examples of this shortly. These are some kind of general categories of reasons why specific applicants were not admitted to our program. I'm even going to share some anonymized quotes about specific applicants. So this is feedback that we received. So we received feedback from people who had both formal meetings and sometimes informal interactions through an online form after interviews. Each of these quotes is describing a different interviewee, who someone interacted with and had some concerns about. And so a lot of these things will go right along with the factors that I just highlighted. So gave a superficial description of their research, and I had a difficult time getting them to go into greater depth. Made me wonder if they didn't really understand what the research experiment or questions were, that they were following some protocol, or that they were following some protocol, rather than really understanding the whole thing. They could not hold a conversation about it when I asked additional questions. Rarely spoke of their research, and when they did, they used very broad terms so that it was hard to elucidate to what extent they knew their work. When I asked their reason for pursuing grad school, there was no strong motivation or significance. So you could probably see why, see how these are not things that you would want someone to be saying after meeting with you, right? So weak understanding of their own research projects, vague future interests that are based on what they've done before, no questions or thoughts about my research. So these are the sort of meetings that faculty just, kind of look forward to ending. In one case, maybe more than one case, at least in past years, I can remember at least one meeting, maybe two, where I just ended it early because it was going nowhere. I couldn't really keep them going about their own stuff. They had nothing to ask me about my research or any aspect of our program or Madison. So, okay, well, yeah, why don't we end a little early? I might say that in a very cheerful way, but that doesn't mean it's a positive outcome. Yeah. And I've even got another page of these. Didn't ask questions about anything. They talked about their project the entire time. So you can kind of err in either direction, like either only wanting to talk about your own project or not really wanting to say much about it. Neither one of those is great. You kind of want to aim for a balance of conversation, I guess, between, like your background and, the research of the person you're talking to, or broader questions that you have about their lab, about the program, or the community. There's a balance to be struck there. Candidate tended towards discussion of the more mundane elements of research, not a lot of intellectual engagement with new ideas. Seems to be most familiar with the mechanistic aspects of their own project rather than the big questions. You see that theme kind of pop up more than once here. Description of research experience seemed very rote, questions very formulaic, seemed not engaged with my research or aware of what we do. We'll get to that a little bit in a moment as well. I wanted to hear about their project, but they did not go deeper. They did not seem very interested in my project either, looking at their watch or phone with irritating frequency and no questions. So I just decided to share some of these as negative examples. I've even got one more little bonus round here. And so this is entirely from back when we did in-person interviews. And so, yeah, let's see. Oh yeah, okay. So a student reported at Friday's dinner, they talked openly about having awkward experiences during 2 of their interviews. They mean in-person meetings with faculty. I found his comments on this to be unprofessional. So that's from one of our current students. They fell asleep several times during the research talks. And when they were awake at the end, I noticed they were playing a game on their phone, which they thought was hidden by their gloves. That's not great, huh? And lastly, was negative all weekend and very cynical about the program and about activities they were doing. Their attitude actually made it hard on the whole group to try to stay upbeat about the program. So these were all from in-person interviews, but they also, in different ways give different examples of the sorts of behavior, I guess, that is not conducive to favorable interview outcomes. Is a reminder that to the extent that interviews are about evaluation, it can be the whole community that's involved with that, not just the faculty. So, what general advice does all of this lead to? Well, I tried to emphasize this before, that if you feel like you tend to be shy in situations like this, it is worth making a concerted effort to really engage during the whole interview process, whether it's kind of a group session talking about the program and asking for questions, whether it's in-person meetings, or one-on-one meetings with faculty, or time spent in a more social context with students. Just try to keep yourself engaging at least a moderate level, I would say. You don't need to be the person who is talking the most in the room, but you probably don't want to be the person who is talking the least. Clearly some of this is about your ability to talk about your own research. And so it's worth, making sure you have some practice doing that with people who don't know about it. So like people outside your lab, especially. Being able to talk about it in a broad sense. So, framing the question that your research is tackling, and why you're interested in that. Giving the relevant background information that someone needs if they're not familiar with the project. This can be kind of a challenging skill to develop, especially when you're kind of immersed in a project, reminding yourself what another person, is likely to know. Even another person in your field is not going to be familiar with the details of your experimental system. And so, there's a lot you need to lay out, really. And then being able to talk about, in a general sense, like the approach that you used in your research, and to the extent possible, what you found in that research and what it means and why it's important. So, having some practice talking through these points, really kind of having that straight in your own mind, what you want to talk about. You don't want it to get to the point where it does feel like you're just reciting a speech. But you want to know, you want to have a good idea of the points that you want to hit while talking about your research with someone. That's the main thing here. And again, don't be afraid to really express your enthusiasm, because otherwise, nobody can just detect that it's somewhere inside your brain. And of course, as highlighted by the previous examples, stay professional, even if you're not talking with faculty at that moment. One of the important elements of interviews is the individual meetings that you'll have, mostly with faculty, one-on-one meetings with them. And, I would emphasize that it's important before an interview to spend a little time doing your homework about each of the faculty that you're scheduled to meet with. You'll generally be told at least some amount of time in advance what your schedule is, your individual schedule, who you will be meeting with. And that would give you the opportunity to read up on the faculty that you have one-on-one meetings with. Maybe you already have in some cases, because hopefully that program has asked you who you'd like to meet with, and hopefully you're meeting with at least some of the faculty that you wanted to. It's not always 100% in light of faculty schedules and responsiveness, but that's what they're trying to do for you anyway. And so what can you do? Well, it's worth reading about their research. You could look at their lab webpage if they have one, or even just the university's own little thumbnail page about them. You can look up their papers either from that page or through like PubMed or Google Scholar, searching based on their name, often like their last name and initials for an author search. And then it's worth taking a look at some of those papers, especially relatively recent papers. I'd say focus on papers in which that professor is the last author. So papers where their name is the last one on the list. Those are generally the papers that their group, has led the way on. And other publications may be something that they had a minor role in and wouldn't be super keen to focus on in a one-on-one meeting, something where they just had a small role in collaborating with another lab. And so, I would pick a few of those that are recent and seem significant to you and that you're especially interested in. And so I would try to read at least a handful of different abstracts from their recent papers, in addition to their research description on their website, which is sometimes up to date, sometimes definitely not. And if there's one paper that you're especially interested in, maybe you read that whole paper so that you could ask more in-depth questions about it. You could think about what questions you might have about this lab and their research specifically, before your interview comes along. Those can be clarifying questions. If there are things you don't understand, it's okay to say so. That ends up going a lot better than pretending you understand things that you don't. You could also definitely ask questions about future projects that might take off from a particular paper that you're really interested in, or more broadly. And this could be anything from, just that sort of broad question, like, what are you hoping to do next? After this paper, or in general, like, what projects do you see on the horizon for your lab? But I may have mentioned before, some of the most impressive interviews I've ever had were students who not only really engaged on the research of my lab that I was talking about, but actually asked about viable and fairly appealing potential future directions. Like, they suggested future directions that actually made sense, for my lab. And they may have been things I'd thought of, and they may not. But either way, that is especially impressive, I would say, even if not super common or expected necessarily. It's something you could always put a little advanced thought into, and consider. So yeah, do your homework about your one-on-one meetings with faculty. And, I mentioned having some questions ready, like in that context of the research of specific labs, but you should also have some more general questions ready on multiple fronts. And so some of those could be about this graduate program, or related resources available at that university. Could be, anything from the curriculum to the structure of rotations, if that's relevant, to the amount and type of teaching that grad students do, to different professional development options that align with your career goals, to details of the benefits available to graduate students, any of these topics and more, even just questions you have about living in that place that are important to you. And in your one-on-one meetings, I think it makes sense to have some questions that are not necessarily lab specific, but that get to, like, what sort of mentor are you looking for, and how does this compare, with the philosophy of the person you're interacting with. So you can ask them about, their, what is their approach to mentorship, or, how involved do they tend to be with their students on a regular basis. You could ask them details about the people in their lab, if that's not necessarily obvious and up to date on their website. There's different things that you might consider asking about, even in these one-on-one interactions. You definitely don't want this to, be at the expense of any conversation about research, but you should probably have some conversation about research in each of your one-on-one meetings, I would say, but that doesn't need to be the whole time. What would you want to know about living there? I mentioned that. And the other thing I wanted to highlight is that, sometimes I might meet with someone kind of late in the interview, and, they might very honestly say, like, I've really already asked all my questions. It is all right, and often quite beneficial to you to ask the same questions to more than one person. It's not like people are going to compare notes and be like, hey, they asked me that too, what's going on? No, that doesn't really happen. And it wouldn't really be a bad thing, even if that did come up. So especially, unless it's just a very simple factual question where there's one answer, and, there's no need to hear it twice. There are some questions where, it's just worth hearing multiple perspectives, like if it's asking people, how they feel about the culture of this graduate program. It's okay to ask that more than one time, in the presence of different people. And that, always comes across better than just, saying, I'm kind of out of questions. You'd rather not have that sort of dead air during your interview. So that's my last little bit of advice in terms of having questions ready for an interview. So I thought I would say a little bit more just about like the big picture of how interviews are timed and the formats that they can take. In terms of the timing, at least, this may vary somewhat between fields. So in my own field, so not just for our program, but across all different programs, because I've looked at when other programs interview in my own field. And the answer there is between mid-January and early March. So our own interviews, especially this year, are at the very early end of that. They're like January 9th and 10th. I don't know if anyone's going to do interviews before that. So there's a lot that has to happen before then in terms of evaluating applicants, inviting them, and giving us time to put together faculty meeting schedules for each applicant and conveying that to the applicants. We're pretty ambitious in our timeline, and that's kind of hard to beat, at least for, programs with December 1st deadlines. So, this tends to be the overall time frame. I've seen some interviews that go like maybe into the first week of March at most. Generally not after that in my field. Now, one thing that's been changing is that it used to be that all interviews were basically in person unless you were like on another continent. Then, maybe in the old days it would be like, by phone, maybe with some extra email interactions. It's become somewhat different now, very different in my program. So there are still some programs that do in-person interviews, I think. But I think more and more programs are shifting to having interviews online only. That's what we do. And some might do some of both, but this is one of those things I think I mentioned before that like we started doing this out of necessity during the pandemic. And then we realized it was actually working better that way. Our applicants prefer this model. Our faculty prefer this model. It saves us a ton of money. There's really, it's a win-win-win. So, I've even surveyed our interviewees about this, and like, 90+% of them like this. And then basically, so we do online interviews that, actually kind of take the form of just this big Zoom call. And so, there are kind of group events where everyone's together with some presenter or, panel discussion format. And there are individual meetings which take the form of Zoom breakout rooms specific to either each applicant or each faculty member. And so, all different events, formal to informal happen in that sort of context. And then we decide who we are going to offer program acceptance to, and we invite them to come here at our expense in March. I think it's like early to mid-March. We don't like to let it get too late because people start making decisions. Even though the deadline to make decisions is not till mid-April, and that's a pretty widespread thing. There's actually this university compact, this agreement among universities to not pressure accepted students for decisions prior to April 15th. Not every university is a part of that, but many are. And so it's a widespread date for when applicants' decisions are due. And we'll probably touch on that again in a few weeks. So in our case, we're inviting our accepted applicants to visit later. And so then they come and, it is 100% in terms of their decision process. There's no pressure. They're already accepted. And they can really just worry about answering any of their remaining questions, seeing in person what it's like, both in our own space here on campus and what the surrounding community is like. It tends to go well. Plus, if it's not only, that we don't have to, fly out people that we didn't end up accepting, it's also that, for some of them might realize, even if we've accepted them, they got in a lot of other places, and they may have figured out by then that we're not like in their top few, and they don't really want to take the time to come and take a trip here and miss class or work or whatever. That is one of the challenges of interviews, by the way, is that like if you're applying this year, you may miss a fair bit of class next semester. Professors should be very understanding about that. But it's still something you have to work around. And that will be both because of physical travel, potentially, and also because of the schedule of online interviews. So you want to prioritize the interviews and make up the classwork as best you can, especially because if you are applying this year and you're getting interviews, well, there's a good chance you'll accept one of those offers. There's a good chance you'll get offers and accept one of them. And in that context, well, your last semester grades aren't ever going to factor in, to your grad school admissions process. There's not going to be a whole lot of importance attached to them, after that either. Maybe you list your GPA on a fellowship application or something while you're a grad student, but in general, it doesn't remain a very big deal going forward. So the other thing I thought I would talk about is just scheduling. So different programs have different date options available. And some programs, especially larger programs, have multiple date options available. They might have 3 or even more date options available. But other programs might have 2 or even just 1. This year, for the first time, we are going to 1 interview date for our own program. And we chose dates that we felt like would have little or no conflict with other programs' interview dates, both because they're early and because we slid them toward kind of early in the week, which is less popular, or even kind of midweek, I think. So there can be kind of a schedule juggling act if you have a lot of interview invitations. You try to figure out how you can fit in the ones that are most important to you. But programs might also vary in terms of what they would say if you said, I'm not available during those dates. So actually, when we had like 2 or even 3 interview dates, we felt like that was offering enough options to our applicants, and that if they weren't willing to prioritize us for one of those dates, they probably weren't going to come here in the end. And so we actually made them choose, you can decide to come here on one of those dates, or, sorry. Now that we're doing just 1 date and that we have more experience doing asynchronous interviews, like Zoom calls with applicants who are on the other side of the world, I think we would give more flexibility on that front. But my advice is that you should feel free to decline any interview. And so like, sometimes in the past, I've had like, when we had specific dates and that was all we were offering, sometimes I would have someone say, well, I already agreed to interview at this university on this date and that university on this other date. Actually, you should feel free to, withdraw that if there's, a schedule conflict and there's a program that is a higher priority to you, and even from, it's not like an unprofessional thing. It's just, being honest about your priorities. Because, from the program standpoint, like, if someone wasn't that interested in us as a program and they knew that by the time of the interview, I'd actually rather they just withdrew. I don't, there's no favor to us of just going through the motions of the interview process out of some sense of politeness. It's actually better for us if they just withdraw and, people know they don't have to take the time to meet with this person. And it's just a better deal for us actually in that case. So feel free to prioritize and reprioritize your interview schedule as you see fit. All right, this is your chance to interview me about interviews. We still have a good chunk of time left if we need it. Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. In the case of our program, it's 5. So these are, I think, just half-hour meetings, just to prevent the whole schedule from getting too grueling. And there's at least like a 15-minute break between each one. Sometimes they might run over a bit, but that is the target. Yeah, and that may vary among programs. I can't really speak to that.
How many interviews should say you apply to 10 programs, you do all of them, how many points?
Oh, okay. Like, what is the most you'd really want to do? That is kind of a personal choice. I mean, I think I'd say there's probably not much point in doing 10. So, you might already have some idea about, which programs you're likely to prefer. But you want to give some space for changing your mind, of course, as a result of interviews. That definitely happens. And you want to allow for the possibility you don't get in everywhere. I think if I was doing it personally, like, I probably wouldn't do more than like 7 anyway. Because I mean, even if I didn't get in for a few, which is probably about the worst that would happen, at least in the sorts of programs like rotation programs that I'm talking about. Even if there's a few I didn't get in, that would give me still multiple choices among the remainder. So I might try to trim off my least preferred. The dates might say something about that, especially if programs did not give alternatives to the synchronous interview schedule. But yeah, like if I got 10 interview invitations, I'd probably look to trim a few, but it's fine to do several interviews. Yeah. Can you say that again? That is totally fine. Yes. I don't know if there's any magic wording there, and I think people end up asking that in all sorts of informal ways. I don't really have any better suggestion than that, really. You could lead in with asking about, like, if you don't know, like, which lab they're in, and what their lab studies, and then ask a little more about their project specifically. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know if they're like, it might feel awkward, but I don't know if there is really a less awkward way to just like, ask someone what they research. Anybody else have an idea? Maybe I'm just not that good at finding non-awkward ways of saying things, but I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could angle it in different ways. That's one angle. You could also, like in my field, you could ask about what organism they study, or you could ask what questions they're most interested in, research-wise. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. Yeah. Mhm. I'd say that could happen. Um, I'd say faculty have perhaps famously diverse personalities. And so some may just be very direct like that. And a lot of them will, you know, start with something lighter, just to help you feel a little bit more comfortable, just like asking how your visit or virtual visit is going so far. Asking like, if they don't know, like, where are you visiting us from? Um, you know, yeah, I mean, sometimes before long, they might turn to just that sort of question. Others might never ask you about that. So not every interview ends up having the same content. Some some people, yeah, some faculty might want to go there pretty directly in terms of like your research, and others might not. Others might just kind of wait for you to ask them questions, or they might have questions for you that are not like, what has your undergraduate research been about? They might have, kind of like, big picture sort of questions for you, like, why do you want to become a graduate student? I definitely have colleagues who ask that sort of question. I think it's a very fair one. Now, okay, that also gets to things you might have talked about in your personal statement, but it's the sort of thing that, someone might like to hear your answer off the top of your head as well. And others might be more passive and just kind of wait to see what you want to talk about. Maybe, and maybe they just say like, what can I tell you about, our lab or our program or our university? And maybe they really like to talk about their own research. That is one possibility. I think if you have like 5 interviews in a day, they won't all have the same balance, generally speaking, of like your research, their research, other topics. So there's not one way that interviews go. Instead, they could go any of those ways. And it partly depends on you, but it definitely also partly depends on the specific faculty member you're meeting with. They're all different. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Um, I guess you could go a little bit broader, like, how have you liked being in the so-and-so lab? It's just a little less on the nose. Or another approach could be like, you know, like, what would you say, Yeah, what is your advisor's mentorship style like? You know, if even if it's not like, you know, even if you're not framing it like a, a up or down sort of question, I think you'll tend to get a sense of whether they're happy from their response to any such question, really. So yeah, I think any way that you approach it, it's worth asking that sort of question. It will not seem out of place, and especially for the labs that you're most interested in, it is worth digging out any sort of information you can in terms of how the lab members feel about being there. Up here, yeah. Sometimes. You can never really be sure. So I can't say if this is true of everyone. We make the applications available to faculty who are going to meet with that student. Some of them will not even have time to look, or will not find time to look. And others will, and they will scan through it. Not many will read it thoroughly, but some of them will at least scan through to get a sense of like roughly what this person did, or what they've done, where they're at, where they've been before, what they're interested in doing, what their recommendation letters look like. So there's a whole spectrum there. It's not predictable. So yeah, that's kind of tough for you because you can't assume that they have absorbed any information from your application, but they might have. So yeah, unfortunately, I can't really give a very predictive answer on that in general. It's going to vary. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, I think so. They have to agree, and sometimes they don't. Some faculty don't answer when we tell them that there are students interested in meeting with them. So if they didn't want to, they won't. I mean, it's always possible you find someone who's a little bit exhausted or having a bad day for whatever reason. But in general, yeah, they want to be meeting with you. They have chosen to. Nobody's making them do it. It's one of the things about faculty. It's kind of hard to make them do anything. We're a very independent lot. And so, yeah, generally speaking, if they're meeting with you, it's because they want to. Some faculty are willing to meet with students, even if they don't plan to take any students. A lot of faculty aren't willing to meet with students in that case. So usually the faculty you're meeting with are at least potentially interested in considering you for their own lab. And they're pleased that there are students interested in potentially working with them. And they also want to make a good impression on you. So it's worth keeping that in mind. Up here. I would say in our own program, the one-on-one meetings end up producing the most feedback for our admissions process. We get scattered feedback from more informal interactions, positive and sometimes negative. Generally we get more positive feedback than negative feedback. Actually, one of the challenges for us is that, faculty tell us that every applicant they meet with is like the greatest thing ever. Whether they just really, think that about every applicant, or they're hoping the ones interested in their lab will get in, I don't know. But we get a lot of positive feedback about our interviewees. So but it's, it's worth keeping that in mind. It's another thing that can make you, feel positive going into interviews. We actually kind of badger our faculty. I'm not trying to play off the Wisconsin theme here, but like if they don't give us a report about an individual meeting, we will pester them for it. Because we don't want to have like, we don't want to hear from like only, one or two of the faculty that met with this student and then still be asked to decide whether they get in. That's not a good situation for us as an admissions committee. So we try to have the full information that we can. It's more kind of hit and miss what people tell us from informal interactions. We might get one or two comments about a given interviewee. We might not get any. That's okay too. These are not as impactful usually, but sometimes there are things there that are really notable, either positive or negative. Like especially like, if you think about like the in-person, the negative in-person interview behaviors that I mentioned, those comments all came from informal interactions, where people were not really, acting in the right ways. Anything can matter, but in terms of the evaluative part of the interviews from the program's perspective, at least for us, we're ending up going mostly on the in-person one-on-one interviews with faculty. That's where we get the most consistent feedback. And we consider other feedback too. There's not always as much of it, but also like even those of us who just participate in the interview activities themselves, we might notice, things good and bad, about different applicants, like this applicant skipped these events and didn't mention why. This applicant seemed especially engaged the whole time, asked really good questions. That is not invisible to us, like I'm at some of these events for our online interviews. Our graduate coordinator is at maybe all of them. She's in the room with us for admissions decisions. She remembers things. So anything can matter, but yeah, in terms of admissions, it ends up being the one-on-one faculty meetings that matter more. Up at the top. Like, so you're asking whether it matters to the professor which graduate program a student enters? Yeah, in some cases, yes. And there can be multiple reasons for that. It's definitely like if you're applying to more than one program at the same institution, it's definitely worth asking faculty their impressions about which programs might be the most appropriate for you. And, all different things might occur to them. And there might be applicant specific factors like, maybe you already have a good background in this area, but if you're going to join their lab, they'd like you to have a good background in this other field as well. And if you join this program, then their curriculum will help you get that background. That's one possible consideration that's rather applicant specific, but faculty, might also think about other things that they know in terms of these graduate programs, including like the funding situation of each program. There might be more funding available through some programs than others. One program's funding might be more tied to TA-ships than in other programs. And so that can also be somewhat applicant specific depending on the interest level in teaching. So it's definitely worth asking about because it can sometimes make a difference even if that faculty member is affiliated with both of the programs that you're considering. Mm-hmm. That might depend. I mean, I think that that's relevant at any stage, but it might even depend on the rules of that graduate school. Like, here they are continuing to allow applicants to apply to 3 programs for the same application fee. Other schools, you might have to pay a separate application fee each time. So that becomes kind of a decision on your part about whether you want to do that. If you don't, then maybe you want as much information as you can beforehand. But if you have the freedom to apply to multiple programs at this institution, then there are multiple programs that truly interest you and that fit your interests reasonably well. Then you might just want to apply to 2 or 3 programs and confirm who is actually going to give you an interview, because it might not be both or all of them. Other questions? Okay, well, it's good to save a few minutes here to talk about what comes next. I didn't put anything about this here, but obviously I'm going to be reading through your personal statements. I am trying to begin with those with early deadlines. But although I didn't mention this before, you should even feel free to put a little comment at the top of your draft. Even now, it's fine. If you're, just confirming if you're applying this year at all, because even among those who do not have pre-December 1st deadlines, naturally my feedback can benefit those who are applying this year. It might benefit them to have my feedback a little bit sooner than everyone else who's going to apply in a future year. So, feel free to note that, like, even just at the top of your draft. Like, I am applying to programs this year. My first deadline is December 1st or whatever, so that I can use that to try to, to just, sequence which ones I do first. And that will be a favor either to you or to your classmates who are applying now. So otherwise, I do not have an assignment that you need to turn in any way for our next class, which of course is in 2 weeks after Thanksgiving break. But I would like you to do some preparation nonetheless for this class. So next time you get a break from hearing me, you instead are going to be interacting with each other in pairs. I'll probably shuffle you around a bit. I'm going to have you each basically take turns, like pretending that you are a professor at a program where your peer is applying to, and asking them a few questions that you feel are relevant, in evaluating this interviewee. Alternately, you will be the interviewee. And so, give some thought to questions that you would ask as like an interviewing professor. Give some thought to how you would answer typical questions, and talk about the sorts of topics that we have gone through in class here. And also think about questions that you would have as an interviewee, not so much about that lab's research, because of course you're talking with another undergraduate in practice here, but things you might like to ask, like about a graduate program, or like it could be mentorship style or things like that. And the person who's being the professor in that case, they don't really have to feel obligated to give any sort of serious answer to those questions, because of course you're not. You're really not in a position to, like, make up a lot of detailed stuff about your entire lab's research program, unless you just want to talk about what your lab does. That's fine. Or the graduate program that you're hypothetically affiliated with. But think of questions that you would ask anyway. You know, and you could always give feedback on the questions that your partner's asking. So, you know, give some thought to these things and be ready. That's all I'm asking. All right, so I will see you in 2 weeks.